just submitted it, so hopefully we'll have the official publication soon, but the results were really interesting. So
quite, they were. It's like we always think there's so much progress, and then you do a study with like, oh, did we have 280 plus dancers?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and then it's just like, oh, crikey, not that much progress. Yeah.
Yeah, more work to be done, but that's fine. But that's, you know, that was the point of the study, wasn't it?
Yeah.
To say, okay, fine, they still need to keep going. We haven't sorted out the dance world yet.
Yeah, it's not an easy world.
No, exactly. No, of course it's not. And you know, when I say sorting out, I mean that, you know, dancing is, well, you guys know, I don't need to tell you this, you're professional dancers. It is tough, it is demanding, and you know, that's the way it is. It's like it's a professional, it's like a professional athlete. It's tough. Yeah. But nevertheless, I think that probably not you, the dancers, but probably the support you receive. There's a room for improvement, put it like that.
Yeah, definitely. And especially in terms of nutrition, because we have physiotherapists in the companies, but we don't have nutritionists.
Yes, I know.
And I think that's is something very important, and something that companies should start like considering, because I think it's very important even for injury prevention or for injury recovery.
Of course, exactly. No, you make a very good point. It's very much on the sort of the physical, the injuries. Yeah. It's like, but why have the injuries happened in the first place? Maybe there was something going on that you could have been done. But I'm very surprised about that, because I think, Steph, in all the big companies, it's surprising there aren't many that actually have.
No.
Even if they have a nutrition, they're certainly not full-time or anything.
Yeah.
So a lot of sports nutritionists, which is just another aspect of this problem.
Yes, quite. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I'm going a bit into detail about this, and I posted about this morning as well, because it does make a difference if you use recommendations for the general population.
Of course, yeah.
Listed answers, because it's just like that's I don't know, diametrically opposed. So you just can't compare them. Yeah. So, but I talk about this a little bit. Yeah, it's just another thing I see very often. It's just like, but we have a nutritionist, and then you know, like you just keep nagging a little bit, and it's just like, what kind of nutritionist is it? And it's just like, well, yeah, she sees a couple of dancers, but otherwise she sees like diabetic patients. Okay, that's just not optimal.
Yeah, and even sport, there are differences.
Yeah, very much.
You guys know this with dance. Dance is totally unique. So even apart from the fact it shouldn't be general population advice, it should not even sport, I would say. It's even more precise for that. And also, by the way, precise for it should be tailored for the individual, because each dancer, you're all different dancers, right? You're all slightly different, let alone the difference between men and women, but even within, you know, female dancers or male dancers, they're all going to be a little bit different. So I think that's the other problem, isn't it? Just giving out generic information, it's not helpful.
No, especially not when you get to see, let's say, tennis specialist, and then the tennis specialist, you ask him, can I do bar again? And then he's like, what's bar?
Yeah, well, with my orthopedic surgeon, I had to say, oh, can I, well, I've had some hip operations, guys, replacements, and when I went to see the surgeon, it's like, will I be able to do retire and arabesque? And he sort of looked at me blankly. So I had to demonstrate. But I thought, well, I better he knows. It's like, listen, and by the way, when you're putting it in, can you give me a little bit of extra turnout?
So, no, I feel like it's very interesting that you guys were dancers and that you are now in this world, because I think just dancers can know really what is it like to be a dancer, what is it like, which muscles you use for each position, and a person that would not have been dancing, it would not have been having the same experience.
And also when dancers describe, oh, I'm having difficulty doing, I don't know, whatever it is, développé devant. It's like, okay, I know what you mean. But if you said that to anyone else, they would like, what's that? Or, you know, so it does help, because then you know, you can visualize which muscles they should or shouldn't be using for doing that movement. So
nice, great.
Okay.
So how are you guys? Are we ready to go?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So let's go for it. So, hi everyone, this is Jorge from Dance Live Europe. We are starting a new week of Dance Live Europe, and today we are super excited to have with us Dancers Overseas and Dr. Nicky KEAY. Both dancers turned Stephanie a doctor and a sports nutritionist, and Nicky turned a doctor specialized in endocrinology. It is a big honor having them today for these nutritional considerations for the Performing Athletes webinar. Before we start today, remember to follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and also share us to make sure this platform continues offering high quality events. You can also find more info about us in our website, www.danceliveeurope.com. And now only to say thank you all so much for your support, and thank you dear Stephanie and Nicky for giving your time to Dance Live Europe today. Enjoy everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much. So that's the moment to share the screen, I guess. Let's start. Okay, and here we go. I hope everyone can see these slides. And probably those listening, you might want to minimize this pop-up window with us 4 co-hosts here, because this might actually take a bit too much off the side. So yeah, let's get started. I'm Stephanie from AUSDANCERSOVERSEAS, a former dancer. I was in musical theatre. I was injured, an injury that ended my career. Then turned to medicine, and then eventually also to sports nutrition. It was at a conference of the International Association of Dance Medicine and Science that Nicky and I met, and we've been in touch and worked together ever since. So as we mentioned earlier, beside our day jobs, which is primarily treating dancers, we still engage with science in that we are actively investigating the topic of health-related issues in dance, and we've just submitted a study with more than 280 dancers worldwide. So I hope we can soon share. Can I just ask everyone to mute themselves? Yeah, because we're hearing there's a bit too much noise in the background. Okay, wonderful, thank you. So, nutritional considerations for the performing athlete. I do need to ask everyone not to use any slides of this presentation, not mine and not Nicky's, without explicit permission from us, because this is our intellectual property. So what this seminar is about, we look briefly at the body of the performing athlete, why it's not the same as the body of someone working in an office, which is kind of obvious, but when it comes to nutrition advice, more often than not, they are considered to be the same. And then we look at training intensities, the body's preferred fuel, typical dance schedules and when to fuel what, how to plan meals and snacks for a day at dance, and that goes for students as well as for professional dancers. We'll have a brief overview over the pre-professional dancer, because this is such a sensitive time, and a brief overview over the plant-based dancer, just because this is so much on vogue and so much goes wrong. And then Nicky will take over and talk about relative energy deficiency in sport, pathways affected by underfueling and physical and mental signs of underfueling, and also how to recover from this state of low energy availability. I'm not quite sure who is not muted, but that's really a little, if anyone can see that, that would be very helpful if everyone's muted. Okay, perfect. So the body of the performing athlete. It's just something we often don't look at within the bigger picture. So the daily schedules of pre-professional dance students and professional dancers are the same level as that of elite athletes. And depending on the discipline, that can easily be a lot more even. So nights a day are very typical for dancers, and while they are typical for athletes as well, the amount or number of sessions per day is very often lower for the athletes. That in turn means they have more time for recovery. But as dancers, you all know that your show ends at 10 p.m. You need to be back in the studio by 9 a.m. the next morning. And that just doesn't happen very regularly in sport. And in dance, it's part of everyday life. Dance is also a discipline where aesthetics play a big role. So dancers usually aim for a lean body, yet quite strong. And this kind of body composition comes with unique challenges regarding recovery and useful combinations of food to recover, to adapt better. And that's very often overlooked. The energy requirements are definitely much higher than for the general population. And yet far too often we see in studies or in our clinics that dancers do not even come close to meeting their daily needs. Diet culture and also advice from lots of people who have no qualification in sports nutrition certainly play a role as well. A very huge concern is, for example, you know, this carbohydrates have no place in a dancer's diet. On a typical day at dance, carbohydrates are actually what keeps the body at its most effective, allowing you to go harder, longer, without early onset of fatigue, without additional stress on top of the training or the movement. That is stress for the body anyway. In the general population, so that's what I talk about so often, like we can't apply advice for the general population to dancers. What is the general population? It varies slightly, but roughly in most studies, that's male patients, mid-40s, sedentary lifestyle, obese or overweight, and a lot of lifestyle diseases. Just think cardiovascular diseases or metabolic diseases, so diabetes type 2 or atherosclerosis, for example. And it's pretty much Western culture dominant. Nutrition and body image in dance have been a topic that's been too emotional for far too long by now. And this is why we are trying to help you look at it way more, let's say, from a more rational point of view. I adapted this pyramid made by Sally Harrison from Strength for Dance. And you can see easily in this pyramid that nutrition is very much the basis, the foundation. That's the one thing. It's maybe for the one or the other, it might be surprising that the actual dance skill comes on very much on top of the pyramid. But let's look at nutrition. That's the basis. Without proper nutrition, everything else is not going to be as good as it could be. But when we look at nutrition science for dance, exactly, you find that at the very bottom. It's nutrition for the general population that we have most. Then possibly nutrition for young adults or elderly people, nutrition for specific illnesses. There's a lot nutrition for active people, so hobby sports. Then there are alternative approaches to nutrition. Then there's nutrition for athletes. Then there is nutrition for elite athletes, which is really not much at all. And then at the very, very bottom comes nutrition for dancers. So that basically means what's needed the most is available the least. But that shouldn't mean that we should just take what's published for the general population and apply that to dancers. Some findings can be applied. So for example, our knowledge today about saturated fats and their negative effect on health, that is really applicable to everyone. So that means young people, older people, healthy people, sick people, athletes, non-athletes. The effects of saturated fats have been proven, let's say so thoroughly, that this is one of the few exceptions that can be applied, but other findings have absolutely no place in a typical day at dance. For example, say hummus and veggie sticks or an egg as a snack are a good idea or an idea or even ideal. When you actually run, you've had your morning class, you've had your, let's say that was Pilates, your warm-up class, and then you've had your first classical class, and then you're just running to another studio because you basically have no time and you still have to change your shoes, but you also need a snack. So if you then have an egg, you're not going to feel fine. I just go into the details of that very soon. We need to look at the training intensities and the body's preferred fuel very first thing. So when we look at low intensity, that's yoga, Pilates, not all these elements. Some will definitely push your heart rate a little higher to medium intensity, but mostly leisurely walk, some strength and conditioning exercises. So and then we get to medium intensity where the heart rate is clearly raised, or high intensity where it's raised above 70% of the maximum heart rate. And these are parts of dance class or rehearsal or performance. And these low intensity exercises use. Can I just remind, please, everyone really just to mute themselves? This is extremely loud for me, hearing these background noises. Okay, so when we look at low intensity trainings or workouts, so that could be a warm-up in the morning, the body's preferred fuel will be fat. And then we go to class, which is still in most companies usually a classical class. That's carbohydrates. And high intensity, that's carbohydrates as well. So this means for dance, for the actual movement of dance, the body's preferred fuel is carbohydrates. And this is something which I encounter that in clinic quite a lot, and Nicky, you probably as well. This is just something that is like unknown, unbelievable, and probably due to also let's say promotions like fat burning high intensity interval training, because just from what we've seen right now, you got that right, it doesn't exist. So that's really a rather uncomfortable truth, and for some it's really hard to believe, but there is no such thing as fat burning high intensity interval training. Your body will use carbohydrates as fuel for this kind of workout, and what's usually associated with these workouts being fat burning is that they require so much energy and have a long-lasting effect for hours after you ended the workout, that you eventually may shed or burn some body weight. But that will only happen if you are in a negative energy balance, meaning you need to consume less energy than you expend over a day or two or a week or a month. And also, if you're already lean, very lean, like dancers are so often, this kind of exercise might put so much stress onto your body, especially when done regularly or fasted, which is just another trend, that your body will really go on riot and not shed any fat at all anymore. Nicky will talk about this later, because that's very often the state of low energy availability. There's a really upsetting misconception that utilization of body fats is no problem at all for dance, when it is quite clear that most elements of dance can only be fueled well by carbohydrates. I will go a little bit into detail what will happen if you try to fuel your dance by burning fat. But as Louise Berg has said, I don't know how often already, and she's figured this all out in her studies, burning fat will not allow training at the same high intensity. It will slow you down. It will have a negative impact on your performance, and it will make you fatigue early. So actually nothing we would want already in the morning. But we need to look first at glycogen, so, or rather those carbohydrates I'm talking about all the time. The carbohydrates stored in our body, that's basically glycogen, and glycogen consists of up to 55,000 glucose molecules, usually in a chain, folded. It's the primary storage of glucose in our body. And it can always be utilized for movement, but actually only for the muscles that really are being moved. So if we are theoretically moving our lower body, and the glycogen in our lower body is used up, we can't recruit the glycogen from our upper body to fuel this movement. The liver stores a little bit of glycogen as well, but this is needed to balance blood glucose levels. So that means when your blood glucose is being used up, The liver releases a little bit into the bloodstream to level it out again. But this storage is absolutely finite. And once it is used up, you know that feeling, you've been hungry. That is when literally all your glycogen stores are empty. And that's nothing but your body's cry for food. So let's go back to fat as fuel for medium or high intensity training. The process of metabolizing fat into glucose takes a while. And while this process is underway, your body is no longer able to power through class or rehearsal or performance at the same intensity as before. So you will usually recognize this by suddenly feeling rather fatigued, or your legs are getting heavy, or your arms get a bit shaky, and all these other uncomfortable signs of not being appropriately fueled, like you suddenly have trouble memorizing choreography. You might, but the thing is, dancers, perfectionists, you might even want to push harder because you think you're being lazy or unfocused. And not enough dancers have been taught to identify this as the moment when their body urgently needs fuel. And let's not even start talking about keto diets for dancers. There's been so much out there. The short answer is no. I refer back to Louise Berg. There is no way that that enhances dancing performance in any way. So next one. Carbohydrates in class or in ultra short breaks. I hear you already. So let me get started. You know that moment when breakfast is a couple of hours ago, you did your own warm-up, or maybe you had a conditioning class or a Pilates class to start the day. Then you head into your first class of the morning, which is still, as I said earlier, usually a classical class. From there, you need to run to another studio, you need to change your shoes and to continue for another 75 or 90 minutes. And you don't fuel. And you're not feeling really well, it's strenuous morning. This is your body in fat burning mode, keeping you from being the best dancer you can be. This means not fueling any carbohydrates, refueling any carbohydrates in these ultra short breaks, which almost can't be named a break at all. This means you're switching into fat burning modus. So that's what we don't want. We want keeping the bodies in carbohydrate burning modus. And how can we do that? So while you're running into the studio, you can consume some very simple carbohydrates. That can be some dried fruits. That can be a small tablet of dextrose or two. That can be a couple of jelly beans if you like them. A fruit-based energy ball. That can be a homemade sports drinks, which is basically approximately a ratio of 1:1 juice and water with a little bit of sodium. I hear you saying, I can't eat that. Sugars, I can't eat that. Let's just look back at what I've said about the exercising body. Sugars are the only nutrient that will allow a continued performance at the same level as before. What you choose is up to you, what you like, and also what you can stomach well. It's a bit of trial and error. And honestly, for the body of an athlete, of a dancer, it won't make a difference if it's dried fruit or jelly beans. This is something that is totally different for the general population, for someone who sits like 12 hours a day at their desk. But in athletes, in these moments, in this context, it's not about where the energy of these jelly beans are going to be stored, because they're not going to be stored anyway. They're going to be used up to enable you to be the best dancer you can be. And the nicest comment I ever got from a patient who started to implement homemade sports drinks into her daily routine was like, she could suddenly sustain her energy so much and so much better than her colleagues that they would be like, okay, no, we can't go through this choreo once again. If you can do that, that's fine, but you know, we're out. I hear you, you want healthier snacks. Healthier snacks in such mini breaks are, let's say, not advisable. You can do it, but it's not very smart. So why can't I eat hummus with veggies or crackers in this kind of break, or an egg? Well, technically you could, as I said before, But your body will need so much longer to absorb and process protein and fat included in these snacks. And the same for very complex carbohydrates, like think whole grains or so. And the energy that you would need to continue isn't readily available. So that's again forcing your body to go back into gluconeogenesis with all the negative consequences for your immediate training. And if you try to feed such a snack like veggie and hummus or an egg to a marathon runner during their race, their times would deteriorate. They wouldn't achieve their personal best anymore. So we've got slightly longer breaks. These happen, I know not too often for many, but they happen as well, luckily. Slightly longer breaks are absolutely okay for this kind that you very often call a healthier snack. You need to try what your stomach likes most, and I definitely always recommend variety as well, because well, it can get really boring if we have the same 6 days a week. And good options can be a carbohydrate snack that includes simple and complex carbohydrates, plus a bit of a protein, which is a protein pulse. This is what you very often read in protein pulse. It's what you very often read in sports literature. This can be some slices of fresh fruits dipped in nut butter, some yogurt or yogurt alternatives and fresh fruits, a more nut-based energy ball or a muesli bar, an oat bar with dried fruits, a slice of bread with jam and honey, or some jam, ricotta and honey. So there's already a lot of options for this kind of break. And then we've got the lunch break. A balanced lunch is the best you can do for your well-being if you have the time. So lunch is big discussion in our clinic sessions always, because it differs so much worldwide. So some companies have a mandatory 60 minutes lunch break. Others have basically no break longer than 10 to 15 minutes until sometime late in the afternoon. And in the latter case, that means you need to be smart with snacks and beverages until you eventually make it to lunch. However, when you can enjoy your lunch, make it a balanced one. Eat foods that you enjoy. Complex carbohydrates, some simple carbohydrates, a source of high quality protein, mostly unsaturated fats will provide the body with all it needs, with the fats not only helping to meet your energy needs, but also to facilitate the absorption of micronutrients. Meal prep actually is such a helpful, well, let's call it habit. This makes sure you can enjoy the foods your body loves most, you love most, and that just makes you feel awesome. However, I know it's not always possible, and it's not always due to a lack of time, but rather circumstances you just can't influence, like no fridge in the theater. I know companies where the dancers store their pre-packed lunches on the windowsill outside in winter to keep their lunches cool because they don't have a fridge. So that limits your choices already quite a bit. And last but not least, eat what works well for you and not what others think you should eat, or what you think you should eat because others are posting it on social media. You need to eat what makes you feel the best dancer you can be. Post last workout of the day, that's also really important. You've probably heard or read about a specific time window for protein intake after a workout or after the last workout of the day. And you may have also heard that this is completely nonsense. As so often, it totally depends. And in the case of dancers with very lean physiques and a high percentage of dancers not meeting the daily energy needs, the window is actually a very helpful one. Immediately after a workout, the uptake of nutrients is supported through a couple of receptors or transporters that disappear after a while. And the moment they have disappeared, the whole process of synthesis and restorage and repair becomes much harder for the body. So why put that on top if we can be smart? If you manage to consume a snack or a beverage like a flavored milk, for example, or for the Aussies, I'm always saying like milk and Milo, then your resynthesis, restorage of glycogen will be enhanced, and your muscle protein repair, so that's your adaptation to training, will be improved as well. And that's really important to emphasize here, because recovery periods for dancers are notoriously short. As I said, like 10 p.m. the last show ends, and 9 a.m. you're expected back in the studio to warm up. That's a recovery period. When I mentioned that on exercise nutrition congresses, like people just laugh at me and they're like, are you kidding me? And I'm just like, well, no, basically that's the life of a dancer. We don't have pre-season, we don't have off-season, we just have season. Yeah. So everything that we can do to improve our recovery really should be done. And then we've got dinner. It should be preferably, quite boring message somehow, a very well-balanced meal as well. So similar to lunch, it's usually bigger because for most dancers and pre-professional students, this is the time when they have, when they really have time to sit down and eat bigger portions without feeling like too filled up. You know best how active you've been throughout the day. You've learned about training intensities today and the body's preferred fuel. So you will have now a rough idea, at least, what your body probably needs most. And I really hope all of that makes very soon so much more sense to you. Yeah, and have some dessert if you like, or make the dessert a pre-bedtime snack. Pre-bedtime snack is something I use in clinic a lot with dancers recovering from relative energy deficiency in sport. It's not only a good way to sneak in some much needed energy or extra energy, it also has a profound scientific evidence to enhance muscle recovery overnight. So let me just remind you of the, as I just mentioned a minute earlier, notoriously short recovery times that dancers have. The protein casein, which is found in milk and dairy products or available as a supplement in powder form, is very slowly absorbed, much slower than other proteins. And so it remains active overnight when all the other proteins have already been used up, which is just another big plus on the side of how do I improve my recovery. This way, it keeps up muscle repair overnight, adaptation processes are being kept up, and your recovery in itself will be just taken to a whole other level. For plant-based eaters, the not so good news is that casein can be found in plant-based products or supplements. And the current evidence, but it's weak still, suggests that possibly a soy product mixed with a hemp product, could be a hemp protein powder, for example, could come close. However, it's quite clear it's still not the same. And now let's quickly look at pre-professional students, puberty, adolescents. What's most often overlooked is that adolescent athletes and dancers do require energy to grow and to cover their training expenses. Either, either growth or covering training expenses is so often, kind of almost forgotten about. So unfortunately, underfeeding, and that's what a lot of studies show, underfeeding or underfueling is very common in youth athletic populations. The reason why there are no general recommendations is that the time window of puberty varies widely. There are the difference between males and females, and then there are differences with early onset and late onset puberty, for example. And their metabolic, they undergo a huge variety of metabolic changes as well, and sometimes it's really difficult to say, like we can't say every 14-year-old, or like when they are 14-year-old, that's their metabolism going to be like, and when they turn 15, that's what their metabolism is going to be like. The problem that we see very often is that when it's being talked about protein needs in adults, we consider the adult body composition, the activity level, the age, their gender, as an example. And And in adolescents, on the other hand, it's not considered that protein is required for all the same mechanisms as in the adults. Plus, they need to grow to support and also adapt their training. And this is why their protein needs are frequently totally underestimated. They also have very specific needs for calcium and vitamin D, which I will show you on the next slide. And we should not forget that carbohydrates and fats are just as essential as in adults. In an athletic context, the pre-professional schedules are often close to or even more than what is considered an extreme exercise program. Although, of course, probably every dancer would be like, well, extreme, that's normal. I know the schedules, I've been there myself. Certainly because dance is such a small specialty, there are no official guidelines addressing this issue, but that's the reason why we are so passionate about raising awareness. It's not that the schedules have to change, it's just time to be smarter around health and well-being, raising healthy and resilient dancers and early interventions. And it's also important to acknowledge that their pre-professional training is a time when they develop a healthy or unhealthy relationship with food, and simply the same goes for healthy or unhealthy body image. The typical problems in young dancers are some blood parameters that can be influenced through multiple training sessions a day, for example, the so-called heel strike hemolysis. I'm mentioning this because I recently once again had a GP telling a mom that her kid is really seriously sick because the red blood cell count was rather low, though it was still in the range. But that could easily be explained through 7 sessions a day. So it's really important to always look at everything in a dance specific or athletic specific context. Vitamin D is also, especially with the Australians I'm working with, being so sun smart, is also always an issue. Low vitamin D levels, Nikki is going to talk about this, so I'm just gonna touch on it here. Vitamin D deficiency is associated with aspects like impaired recovery, negative effects on our immune system, and an increase in injuries. And also totally overlooked, it's intertwined with calcium absorption. So no vitamin D will impair calcium absorption in the gut. And calcium, on the other hand, unfortunately is kind of a victim of dietary choices that are being promoted on social media, because you just can't cut out dairy and you don't need to worry about anything. You got that? Of course not. Plant-based dancer. There we go. Everyone choosing to eat a complete plant-based diet will inevitably miss out on a couple of nutrients, and very often also on quite a bit of energy, because as much as these foods are nutrient dense, they're not always energy dense. And just thinking about how much a dancer, or how high the energy expenditure of a dancer is per day, you can already imagine that could cause a bit of trouble. So the nutrients missed out on most often include calcium, B vitamins, particularly vitamin B12 and vitamin D. If you change your diet, definitely make sure you know how to replace these nutrients. And also, for example, calcium and iron, of course, they can be absorbed from plant-based sources. However, it's quite often not clear how much more complicated that is for the body, and that you might need some extra help, like adding some citrus juice to better absorb iron from your kale or your spinach or whatever food you choose. Fortified plant-based products can be very helpful, as they often have one or more of these nutrients added again. That's what fortified means. So reason enough to check labels. And on another note, protein isn't just protein. Protein in various foods differs widely. You've already heard this example with casein not being available in plant-based diets, but being so good for recovery overnight. And you may know that every protein is built up of amino acids. They are like building blocks. And some amino acids cannot be produced by the body and need to be ingested through food. These are called the essential amino acids. The thing is, not every protein source contains these. So what's often emphasized that soy products are a complete or high quality protein source, plant-based. And then another thing, do you know what alternative products are made of, like plant-based or vegan cheese? You may be surprised, really. Have you ever studied the ingredients list? So some look really good, like some vegan cheese, but they are basically nothing than coconut oil and some additions like aroma or color or stabilizer. And coconut oil is and will always be a highly saturated fat that is not recommended to consume in high doses or very regularly. So definitely recommend, do your research, read the labels. Other cheeses are made of nuts, they are even fermented, and they have a much more valuable nutritional profile, like they are relatively high in protein, mostly unsaturated, healthy fats, and a decent amount of carbohydrates. And just a word on coconut oil, that's I think my last slide. Coconut oil is not a panacea. So I know it's so popular, but so was bulletproof coffee. I can't go into detail here, but a recent new meta-analysis from March 2020 has pointed out once more that the frequently listed health benefits just do not happen. So it would be a wonder, to be honest. As I said, it's so high in saturated fats, and these come, or this high percentage of saturated fats comes with a vast number of negative effects on our health. Just think cardiovascular disease or atherosclerosis. And whenever health benefits are quoted, you can be sure this is the case of science misused or cherry-picked. It's cool and popular and health selling products, I get that. There's just no scientific evidence behind that. And for all things game changers, I really recommend reading the review. This is available for free by Askar Jokendrup, a really excellent sports nutritionist. On his website, just go to www.mysportscience.com. Read this review that he has written. It's really fantastic and clearly shows what's been wrong with this documentation. Or also, I recommend In Bad Taste, the podcast by Pixie Turner and Dr. Nicky Stamp. They have a couple of episodes. I think they actually have 3 episodes about the game changers and why that isn't a good documentary. So if you're really interested in good science and not Netflix science, I do recommend that. So that was quite a lot, I know. A quick run through typical problems we see every day in clinic. Where can you find more information? Definitely in our podcast. There's a new nutrition episode coming out very soon. But also our website features a Nutrition for Dancers section. It's a subscription section where you find 15 categories, everything included. So all macronutrients, micronutrients, immune system and nutrition injury and nutrition, relative energy deficiency in sport, the adolescent dancer, the plant-based dancer, the latest research, recipes, of course, hydration, everything. And yeah, we're actually quite proud that we can still offer it for €4.99 a month as a subscription where you can cancel anytime, because that's basically in Europe the cost of a big Starbucks coffee. Or follow us on social media, AUSDANCERSOVERSEAS, or if there's anything really urgent or you think you won't find an answer somewhere else, just get in touch with us. All right, that's my part. Now I would say I stop this and Nikki will switch on and share her screen.
Great, thanks so much, Steph. Wow, I was taking notes as well. And by the way, people, if you want to post questions on the chat, and Steph and I can try and answer those afterwards, or otherwise, Steph's mentioned there on the slide, there are other ways of getting in touch with us. So, stretch your legs, shake out. Here we go, part 2. So thank you very much, by the way, to the guys for inviting Steph and I to present. That's the first thing, important thing to say. I'm a medical doctor like Steph, also a passionate dancer, still doing my classes, ballet classes, at least 4 a week, even though I've got 2 total hip replacements. So I'm quite proud of myself. I've just conceded retiring from point work, that's it. Anyway, so let's move on. That's interesting. Hold on a second. Oh, there we go. So I'm really going to focus, Steph has given you a lot of information about good nutrition for dancers to perform to your optimal ability. So why is this? Why is nutrition so important? And actually, what's going on underneath the surface are your hormones. Those are crucial to all those important aspects you need for being a good dancer. And hormones, just to remind you, they're internal chemical messengers within the body. You can't see them, you can't feel them, yet they are crucial. And the good news is that to a certain extent, having healthy hormones is actually under your control as a dancer. These are the 3 key dancer behaviors that are going to determine how your hormones behave themselves and how you're going to perform. So under your control to a certain extent, training load, we've heard that's a lot, I know. Recovery, Steph has really emphasized how important the recovery is, because it's during recovery, during sleep, that's when your hormones are going to spring into action and produce those, repair the body and also prepare you for your next day of dancing. So recovery is super important, and nutrition, of course, Steph has just explained why that's so important. So if you get all those 3 elements right in balance, then of course you're going to be the best dancer you can. However, as we've heard, it's not that simple logistically, or maybe you've been given, frankly, misinformation. So if you're lacking in recovery, then you're going to be at risk of overtraining and just feeling really fatigued. Equally, if your nutrition isn't up to scratch, up to demand, then you could end up in this situation called low energy availability. And that's what I'm going to explain to you, exactly what I mean by that. So if you have a look at this slide, and imagine these are 3 different dancers, okay? If we look at the dancer in the middle, you can see this is a happy dancer. They're taking in sufficient energy to cover both their dance training demands. That's the bit shown in blue in that bar chart. And also they have enough energy spare, that's the area shaded in green, to maintain health. In other words, the basic physiological functions, housekeeping tasks in your body, even if you were to lie in bed all day, then you need actually quite a lot of energy just to stay alive and stay healthy. And that's, please notice that that is quite a large amount of what your dietary intake is, let alone on top of the energy demand for your dancing. But the good news is that dancer in the center of the picture, that dancer has got it right. They're taking in sufficient energy to cover both their dance training demand and to stay healthy. If we now look at the dancer on the right, you can see that this dancer, they've got an increased training demand, energy demand from their training. For example, maybe the dancer's gone on tour, maybe there's a new production, so they're training more. But they haven't matched this with increasing their energy intake. So you can see that leaves them in deficit. So they're in the red. So they are what we would say in low energy availability. Probably unintentional, simply because the training load's increased, but they haven't matched that with an increase in nutrition. The dancer on your left is also in low energy availability, as you can see in the red. But in this case, this is probably a dancer who has maybe intentionally reduced what they're eating, because Steph describes there is some misinformation out there. Maybe they believe that they need to be slimmer, they need to look a certain way, or they've been told they need to, and so they have reduced what they're taking in, but that's left them in low energy availability. So you can see as a dancer, if you end up in the red like that, that is a problem. And I'll explain why. That's a problem because if you're in low energy availability, this is what we're talking about REDS, relative energy deficiency in sport. I apologize that it says sport, but by the way, it is dance, okay? But obviously the acronym would be too long if we put in dance as well. But it's all the same principles. So a dancer in low energy availability or an athlete, there's going to be negative effects on health, shown there, and also on performance. And that's a little bit of a worry if you're a dancer or an athlete. So where did this idea come from of low energy availability? Well, it started off, it was described in female athletes originally. It was actually runners. And they noticed that the runners that had a very high training load, higher than their colleagues, then they were more at risk of their periods stopping. Amenorrhea means period stopping, and also negative effects on bone health, bone mineral density. Since that early description of the female athlete triad, it's not an all or nothing. And if you look at this sliding scale underneath, you can see that if you're a dancer and you're taking insufficient energy, then you're fine. You're going to perform to your best and you're going to have healthy bones and regular periods. But you can easily slip down this spectrum. And if you're in low energy availability, then you're at risk of disruption of your menstrual periods and also poor bone health. But the only problem with the female athlete triad was that it excludes half the population. In other words, the men. This picture here, this is actually a professional cyclist, and he's an English cyclist, but he describes how he had to retire when he was in his early 30s because he had osteoporosis. I'm sure you've heard of osteoporosis, very weak bones, because effectively he developed low energy availability and therefore the adverse outcomes of REDS. So this is what we're talking about. This is the term we tend to use now, REDS, because it includes the males and also includes, as you can see from this diagram, many systems. It's not just a case of menstrual function and bone health. There are lots of other aspects that can be adversely affected. And it's well recognized in sport, for example, rhythmic gymnastics, divers, where there's a certain aesthetic to their sports discipline. So this is very similar to dance, isn't it? And also high training volumes. Steph has described why dancers, obviously you're training a lot. So there are several reasons why intentionally or unintentionally you may end up in low energy availability and therefore at risk of REDS. Just a quick word on vitamin D, just to reinforce what Steph has said. It's the overall energy intake is important, but also there is particular micronutrients, very good evidence. Vitamin D is especially important for dancers and dancers where they have taken supplements of vitamin D that actually reduces their injury risk. So especially if you're training indoors a lot and there isn't much sun, there isn't at the moment much sun in London, just looking out the window. So pay attention to your micronutrients as well, like Steph said. Now, the psychological aspects of REDS is very interesting because as a dancer, you have to be dedicated, a perfectionist, probably, which are all great, important, positive approaches. Nevertheless, that can equally put you at risk of developing something like REDS because you are a perfectionist and you want to get it right. And sometimes this can lead you down not helpful nutritional strategies like Steph has described. And then once you are in low energy availability, then that's going to slightly cloud your judgment and actually you won't be able to make those good calls that you need to maybe change up what you're doing. But ultimately, what does this matter? You're probably listening to all of this and thinking, okay, fine, whatever, I just want to be a really good dancer. But the problem is, if you're in low energy availability, you will never reach your full potential. Okay, so normally one increases the training load and you should perform better. But if you're in low energy availability, you'll always underperform, unfortunately. And these are some of the consequences of REDS on athletic performance. Okay. And I want you to pay particular attention, if you will, to the second bullet point there, neuromuscular skills. So this was a study it was in athletes, unfortunately we're lacking in dancers, but nevertheless, this demonstrates the point, I hope, that in athletes, female athletes who weren't taking insufficient energy, in low energy availability, and therefore had REDS, actually their neuromuscular skills were impaired. So by neuromuscular, I mean balance, coordination. These are all sounding, I think, familiar skills that you really absolutely essential for dance. And so, although you might think, oh, well, if I'm very lean and, I'm really cutting down on what I'm eating and carbohydrates are the enemy, Steph described why that's definitely not the case, you will potentially put at risk those very skills that are so important for dancing. So that's really a concern, or something you should consider, should I say. So let's talk about bones, because this is probably one of the most important things or obvious consequences if you're in low energy availability. And so you can see those pictures there of the bones. That's what a normal bone looks like. But you can see osteoporosis, the bone, there's lots of gaps in those bones. So you can see just by looking at that, that's going to be a lot weaker. So if you land from a Grand Allegro step, that's going to be at risk of fracturing. The thing is, if we're all told that if you do weight-bearing exercise, that's really good for your bone health. So as dancers, especially changing direction, when you're doing especially Allegro, you have to do a glissade en avant, you have to do a jeté this way, you have to do, you're changing direction all the time. So that is great for your bones. But all those beneficial effects are negated if you're in low energy availability, because the bones are effectively a source. They need energy, and also they are potentially storage of calcium. And if you're low on those factors, then actually you're going to be eating away at your bones, literally. Okay. And I'm particularly concerned, like Steph mentioned, it's the young dancers where we're particularly concerned that this might have a negative effect and have an influence on their future careers, because normally it's when you're at the pre-professional dancer level, that's when you're building up your bone mass. It's called peak bone mass accumulation. But you can see that if you've got a very high training load and you're not fueling sufficiently, then this is going to have a negative effect on your bones. And this actually was a study I did with some dancers from Elmhurst Ballet School several years ago, and that was a little bit of a concern. And so then you might go into your professional career with already slightly suboptimal bone health, and that's when there could be a risk of getting bone stress injuries. So this is what I was describing just now about how your bones change as you age. So if you look at that green line, let's focus on that. Age along the bottom, bone mineral density up the side. So you can see there's a really rapid increase in bone mineral density during the teenage years as puberty progresses, and then you reach your peak bone mass, and it should stay relatively stable if you've got adequate energy availability through your adult life. And then as you get older, like me, I'm afraid it's a little bit downhill. But if you start off at a low level, if you now look at the red line, if you're a pre-professional dancer, not fueling sufficiently, as Steph described, they've got very high training schedules, maybe not so well advised or putting into practice the nutritional strategies, then this could affect peak bone mass accumulation. And then you can see already you're starting off your professional career slightly low and you've got a high risk of fracture. So that's really the concern for bones if you're in low energy availability. Now here we go. Here's a little, let's see if this works. Apologies, let me just see if this works. Yes, it does. Okay, so let me explain this diagram. The bones obviously throughout your skeleton, but there are different types of bone within that. So the bones in your back, the lumbar spine, that's shown on the horizontal axis, and there is a certain type of bone called trabecular bone. And going up the side on the vertical axis, we have the femoral neck, the hip bone, and that's again, it's a distinct type of bone called cortical bone. And so you can see there's a sort of a fight going on here, that if you're not fueling sufficiently and your hormones aren't working very well, then it's particularly the lumbar spine, the bones in your back that might suffer. Whereas the femoral neck, the bone in your hip, that's more affected by weight-bearing exercise. So you can see that dancers actually generally tend to have pretty decent hip bones, but if they're in low energy availability, there's going to be maybe not such good bone health in the lumbar spine. At the top, in the top right-hand corner, that's meant to represent a rugby player, because rugby players, as far as I'm aware, they're definitely not interested in aesthetics and looking slim. They're all about muscle, and they're changing direction in their sport. So actually, their bones are really super strong. Rowers, on the other hand, they put a lot of force through their back. So relatively speaking, actually, their lumbar spine is not so bad. Swimming isn't such a great sport for bone health because it's non-weight bearing. And then cyclists are, road cyclists are not very good at all, frankly, because it's a non-weight bearing exercise, and also there's the demands of being lightweight. If you think of riders doing the Tour de France, they're definitely all very slim. So dancers, as you can see, so in summary, for dancers, there are certainly some good aspects about dancing for your bone health, but just be aware that those might be negated if you're in low energy availability. So I just want to take you through a case study of a male dancer. So this is a 20-year-old male dancer, and he presented, well, actually, he was actually pretty ill. He was feeling really fatigued. He was having dizziness in class, and he couldn't even do his allegro very well, and reporting poor sleep. But when I spoke to him, it all started when he was in pre-professional training. He noticed that he sat down at the canteen in the school, and he noticed that all his friends, they weren't eating very much. And so he felt pressure. He thought that, oh, this is what you have to do. And then he developed a distorted body image. He said, oh, I thought I looked fat in the mirror. So I did some tests. I did some blood tests. I confirmed that he had a very low male hormone, testosterone. And also I checked out that there was, in terms of his bone health, like I've described, that wasn't looking so great. So what did I do? Well, the first thing I said to him, I asked him, I said, what male dancer do you aspire to be? I mean, he wants to be a professional dancer. I said, who do you look up to? And he said, Stephen McRae at the Royal Ballet. And I said, right, have a look at a picture of him. Does he look really skinny? No, he doesn't. He looks slim, of course, but he looks muscular. He looks strong. He's got an amazing elevation. And so trying to change his outlook about what he was trying to achieve. He was just trying to make himself as thin as possible, but actually this was counterproductive to what he was trying to achieve to be a good dancer. So anyway, to cut a long story short, the good news is that I managed to support him to change his behaviors, so he did actually get back to being a strong dancer. And like Steph mentioned, you don't realize that you're in a bad way until you become better. So for example, when he became better and was fueling correctly, he said, oh, now he couldn't believe he had indeed very good elevation in his Allegro. He said, now I'm being praised that I've got good elevation in my Allegro. I've got energy. I'm progressing. He's got offers for dance companies. So that's the thing. Lots of dancers might say, well, listen, I'm doing fine. I don't think there's a problem. But actually, you're selling yourself short if you haven't really well, being honest with yourself and looked at your behaviors. Are you really doing the best that you could in terms of supporting your dance training with your nutrition and your recovery? Listen, this is a busy slide. I'm not trying to turn you all into doctors, don't worry, but I'm just, Steph mentioned, or we've had a discussion, should I say, that it is important to think about blood tests, okay? So the most important thing is the history. When you talk to, when we talk to dancers and when you talk to us, we're going to ask you, you know, what's going on, what are you thinking, what are you feeling? That's really, really important with the history. But it's our job as doctors, you know, to check out other things. There could be some medical thing going on and we want to make sure we haven't missed that. So this is just to point out to you that if you do go and see a doctor and they just say, oh, there's nothing wrong with you, go away, please try and insist that they do some blood tests just to check the basics, just to see there's nothing medical going on that needs addressing. So now this is sort of just going to do a little bit about female dancers and menstrual cycles. So menstrual cycles, female dancers, these are normal, by the way. This is what, I know they can be a little bit of a hassle, but honestly, they are a sign that you have healthy hormones, okay? So they're a barometer of your health. And there is an example of a triathlete who won the Olympics, the London Olympics, I believe. And she posted, and if you look at a picture of her, by the way, she looks very slim, but she's obviously got her nutrition strategy worked out and her recovery strategy worked out to tie in with her training load, because she put all her periods on Training Peaks, which is something that's used by athletes. So it's definitely possible, if you're a high performing athlete, a high performing female dancer, it's definitely possible to have regular periods. And actually I'd argue it's essential that you do, because it means your hormones will be doing this beautiful choreography you can see in this diagram. This is what's happening inside you with your hormones. And these hormones, you want these hormones on your side to support you as a dancer. So what's so good about these menstrual cycles? It's because of the hormones you produce during these cycles. As you saw in that diagram, estrogen and progesterone are the key ones. And why do you need these? Three main reasons. Number one, bone health. I think we've discussed that. Estrogen is really, really important for bone health. That's why menopausal women, i.e. when your periods stop when you're about 51 or so, then your bones, unfortunately, they're going to get thinner. And you've probably heard a lot about osteoporosis in older women. That's why, it's because their estrogen is low. And you don't want to be a young dancer like a menopausal woman with weak bones, of course. The other important thing is cardiovascular health. There's good evidence to show that estrogen actually is very important in women for their cardiovascular health. And of course, you want this as a dancer. And also, we've mentioned this neurological function. I mentioned that study where they found that athletes in their 20s, 30s who weren't having periods, actually their coordination, balance, control, all those essential skills for a dancer, they were a bit off. So that's why these hormones are great if you're a woman. And if we look now at the issue of stress fractures, this is actually, it's in runners, because I'm afraid most of the work has been done in athletes, not dancers. Anyway, this is a busy slide. Let me explain it to you. So the top two bars, that's for females, and the bottom two are for males. So if we look at the top two horizontal bars, that's comparing eumenorrheic to amenorrheic. Eumenorrheic means normal, regular menstrual cycles. Amenorrheic means no periods, okay? And the black shows two or more stress fractures. And the gray is one stress fracture, and the white, that's no stress fractures. So you can see female athletes with regular periods, 23% of them had 2 or more stress fractures. Okay, but if the female athlete's not having any periods, amenorrheic, they had 46% of them had 2 or more stress fractures, massive increase. So for men, let's see what it looked like for men. So again, if you look at those 2 horizontal bars, normal testosterone levels and low testosterone levels. Okay, so the male athletes who were under fueling and low energy availability, they had the equivalent of a man. In women, if you're in low energy availability, your periods can switch off. If you're as a man, if you're in low energy availability, your testosterone, your male hormone, that will be lower than you would expect for your age. And you can see the ones with normal testosterone levels, in other words, sufficient energy availability, there was still a fair few, 7% had 2 or more stress fractures. But look at that, massive 60% of these male athletes who were under fueling and had low testosterone, 60% of them had 2 or more stress fractures. So that's a little bit of if you needed any further convincing that low energy availability is not a good thing and your hormones are essential, that's the evidence. Now, the next few slides, just to warn you, oh no, beg your pardon, slightly out of order. We've got the female dancer. So let me give you a little case history of a female dancer who was 24 years of age, and she had a steady body weight, BMI of 20. So that is the lower end of the range. BMI is weight over height squared, where you measure weight in kilograms and height in meters. I'm not a massive fan of weight on the scales and BMI, but it just gives it, but suffice to say, the point I'm trying to make is this dancer was not significantly underweight. You would look at her and she looked like a slim dancer, not incredibly underweight. And she was referred, no history of an eating disorder. But the crucial question that had not been answered, and the first one that I pretty much asked her was, what's happening with your periods? And then it transpired that actually she'd had no periods for the past 4 years, okay? And also she had lots of bone stress injuries in the heel, actually, because the heel is a type of bone, the trabecular bone, similar to in the back. And so although she didn't have she didn't have an eating disorder like anorexia that has specific diagnostic criteria, definitely on talking to her about what she was eating, it was what we call orthorexic. So she literally thought that carbohydrates were evil and shouldn't eat those. And Steph's already described to you how crucial carbohydrate is, and frankly you need that form of energy for most of the dance training you're doing. So that really was the crux of the matter. And as with the male dancer, I did my blood tests as I showed you, and we looked at the bone health, and it all confirmed that this dancer was in low energy availability and had REDS. In her case, because her bones were pretty bad and she'd had lots of stress fractures, actually in the short term, she took HRT, hormone replacement therapy, okay? And whilst we were trying to address her behaviors. And this is just a little point I want to make, probably at this juncture is a good time. If you're a female dancer out there listening to this and your periods have stopped, please don't be fobbed off by being told, we'll just go on the oral contraceptive pill and you'll have periods. If you're on the pill, those are not periods. They're not bleeds because of your own internal hormones. They're what we call withdrawal bleeds. So, and there's good evidence to show that actually this doesn't really help your bone health. So please be aware of that and don't be lulled into a false sense of security if you are on hormonal contraception that, that must be okay for my hormones. So just a little word of advice or warning there. And by the way, we're going to do questions at the end of this. So if you've got any further questions on that, happy to answer those, and also any more personal specific questions equally. Right, now I want to just get round to my last few slides you'll be pleased to hear. I'm not trying to train you all to be medical doctors, but I just want to show you why hormones are so crucial and so complicated, okay? This is a little bit like a sort of a choreographic thing, isn't it? Anyway, let me explain the point I'm trying to get across here. If you're in low energy availability, look in the left. If you're in low energy availability, you're not taking in sufficient energy to cover your training demands as a dancer and to stay healthy, there are going to be consequences on your hormones. So you're going to cause a lot of metabolic stress within your body. Steph's mentioned glyconeogenesis. You're going to break down your fat deposits, what little of those you have. You're also going to have external psychological stress factors all feed into the brain. And the body is very clever, because the brain detects that you're in a stress situation, you haven't got enough energy on board. So what does it do? It tries to save energy. It shuts down all your hormone networks. So we've talked about the male and female hormones. Estrogen will go low and your periods might switch off. Males, your testosterone might drop. You might have, you will feel fatigued, loss of libido, these sorts of things for the men. Also, please notice your thyroid gland. Your thyroid, you may have heard of the thyroid gland, releases hormones like thyroxine. This controls your metabolic rate, so the rate at which you utilize energy, fuel, okay? And please notice that this also gets shut down. And there have been studies in dancers to show that if you don't fuel sufficiently, then your metabolic rate dials down. In other words, your body tries to save energy. And this is the problem that dancers might present, saying, I haven't lost weight. How can I be in low energy availability if I'm not losing weight? The point is that your body has adapted. The body has changed the set point to desperately try and save energy. So that's why, please be aware, you don't have to be underweight to be in low energy availability, but you might notice that your periods stop if you're a woman. Males, you might feel fatigue, loss of libido, and basically you just feel tired and not performing to your best. The one hormone that increases is the stress hormone. There over on your right, you see cortisol, and cortisol sort of reinforces all this stressful situation. And interestingly, cortisol also tends to favor the accumulation of fat rather than muscle. So it's a sort of a negative effect on what you're trying to achieve. You want a lean body composition. So this diagram just shows what happens if you keep accumulating energy deficiency. So listen, as Steph described, busy schedules, professional dancers, you might not be, there will be some days that are better than others, and the occasional sort of not being able to get in your snack once in a while, it's not ideal, but it's not the end of the world. But gradually, if you continue this over a long time, gradually, all those hormone networks I just showed you in that previous diagram, they will be impacted and shut down. And ultimately, ironically, at the end of all this, you will tend to put on body fat rather than lean muscle, which is probably what you don't want to do. So just to emphasize that low energy availability impacts your hormone networks. Your hormone networks are essential for your training and your performance as a dancer. So if you remember, one of the very first slides, there was a triangle of those three behaviors as a dancer. You have under your control, your training load, your nutritional intake, and your recovery. And if it is tricky, there's no denying this is difficult to get the right balance of all these things. But if you do, then your hormones will work for you, and yes, you'll be able to perform to your full potential. So just a last few concluding slides. So just to remind you that it's the young athletes, young dancers that are at particular risk because of that high energy demand state during puberty that Steph mentioned earlier. There are going to be impacts physically and psychologically. You won't be able to perform so well, potentially even career ending. And also there's some worrying evidence. I did a study with retired dancers, and that maybe not all of these effects are reversible in terms of bone health. So that's why, you know, best to be aware of this sooner rather than later. So what are you going to look out for? So difficult relationship with food and exercise. So an eating disorder is a sort of a clear-cut thing, if you will, with medical diagnostic criteria. But disordered eating means the orthorexic type patterns, avoiding carbohydrates, these sorts of things. Exercise dependence. I mean, listen, of course, you're all dedicated dancers, and I still, you know, I'm very dedicated to my ballet classes, and I feel bad. And of course, you're going to feel a little bit bad if you have to miss training because of an injury or something. But exercise dependence is when you push yourselves to go to the class or do the rehearsal, even if you're injured or feeling ill, and that's not going to end well in the long term. Your mood and your sleep can be disturbed. Remember, it's not about body weight loss necessarily. For the young dancers, Steph mentioned this, it can impact growth and development for the young dancer. Female dancers, we've mentioned this, menstrual function can be disrupted. You're more likely to be ill and injured if you're in low energy availability. You might have gastrointestinal issues, which seems a little bit counterintuitive, that you might be more likely to get constipation and bloating, but actually it's because all of your systems, including the gut, needs energy to perform its function correctly. And if you're in low energy availability, your gut will have decreased motility, and you might feel a bit bloated and uncomfortable, but you might misinterpret this as thinking, oh, it's because maybe I've eaten too much or I've eaten the wrong thing. Actually, it simply could be an indication you're not eating enough. So what you're going to do, there's this website, healthfulperformance.co.uk, which I wrote for BASEM, which stands for the British Association of Sports and Exercise Medicine. And because I wrote it, there's plenty of talk about dancers on there, you'll be pleased to hear. So please have a look there. There's resources. In the UK, I do this Train Brave campaign with Rini McGregor, clinical dietitian, and we run a clinic. It really is a team approach. Another project I'm doing with Beatrice Schultz, we're starting up something called the Healthy Young Dancer Project, because we recognize that young dancers are at particular risk maybe of misinformation, overtraining, and REDS, low energy availability. And really, ultimately, it's down to you guys, the dancers. You know, to a certain extent, this is under your control. So informing yourself, getting the information, listening to this webinar, telling people to listen to it or encouraging them to listen to it, asking questions. That's really the way to go to be a really informed dancer. And so that's the website. And so hoping this that this helps you, give you some information from what Steph and I have said. And yeah, I think I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to invite questions, comments. Hold on a second. Right, are you guys there? Yes, here we go. So have you been looking at are there any questions or comments, or even Steph, do you want to comment, or the guys listening right now, do you want to make any comments? Sorry, that was a bit of a whiz through.
Yeah, all right.
It's whiz. By the way, just to say,
yeah.
And I'm sure you all appreciate this as dancers, it's very difficult when you can't see any audience reaction, you know? So I'm like doing this thing and I can't see if all you guys are yawning, if you fall asleep, if you're tearing your hair out, if I can't see what's happening. So it's very weird, isn't it, Steph, right? You don't know, you're just talking to yourself and it sounds, anyway. So this is your chance to say something or any comments.
I said something already. I just wanted to make one comment. Is you almost said it already. Why is low energy availability, or why is RED? So let's say, not frequently enough diagnosed in dancers, and why kind of do so many people think, you know, like, just not for dance. And I think that's probably due to, but they are already so good. Look, they are good. They could be maybe, you know, like, oh, maybe she's a bit tired today or whatever. It's just, but look, they are so good, and they are soloists, and they are principals, and, you know, whatever. It's just like, well, actually, do you have an idea how good they could be? If they really...
That's the thing. I think that's a really important point, and that's from my 2 case studies. Both of those dancers were excellent, you see. But that's really the thing. You're selling yourself short. Okay, so you might think, and by the way, I did this myself. I kidded myself for years and years. It's like, hey, listen, you know, I'm fine. And I didn't look super skinny. I looked slim. So that's the thing about the look. The person says, well, I don't look super skinny. I'm doing really well. You know, this can't be right. But I think the point is exactly that you're selling yourself short. And also ultimately, it's a short term, it's not sustainable. You won't be sustainable as a dancer. So yes, you might have a short term, and it's the same for athletes I speak a lot with. It may be that you have, you know, for a short time, you are successful, like you say, you're going up the ranks, you're getting good parts, but you know, there will come a point when your body, like I said, that cumulative effect, the body at some point will say enough is enough. That's it. You get the stress fracture, you get a bad injury, you get an illness, and then your career is cut short ultimately. So I think that's the thing we're trying to encourage dancers to be sustainable, have healthy, long careers, and doing it that way for the short term, that's not going to produce that result. So I think probably that's what do the professional dancers there, have you got any comments on that?
I would just add to this just one more thing. You also talked about blood parameters and getting blood tests done, and I think we both have made this experience how hard it can be, that if you've got to send someone to their GP to get actually really the results you need, because sometimes I sent them back 3 times. It's just like, yeah, but like, he's only 15, so why would I do testosterone? Or no, I think he was 16 anyway. So like, why would I do testosterone? Well, actually, because it's absolutely crucial in assessing whether he's in low energy availability.
Yes, but and also, yes, but I mean, definitely, I would reinforce that point, absolutely. And if in the UK anyway, if I have any athletes or dancers who are having problems getting the blood tests done that are required, then I say go to your GP armed with the page on the website I mentioned, the Health Performance website, because it's not my personal website, it's the website of BASEM, which is the British Association of Sports and Exercise Medicine. So basically the doctor, if they have problems, just take them there with the page on your phone, say, look, this is what is being recommended these blood tests to do. And it's more or less the list that I showed you quickly in that screen. Nevertheless, even then, if that doesn't work in the UK, I'm the Chief Medical Officer of Fourth Edge, which is a blood testing company, which you can do, you know, through a finger prick, and you can send it off to the lab and get it analysed. But yes, thanks, Steph, for making that important point, because one shouldn't make assumptions. You know, you look at a dancer and they look, the GP might think, well, they look fine. What are they talking about? There's nothing wrong. But actually, you need to make sure you haven't missed anything. Because although it could well be REDS is a diagnosis of exclusion, as we say in medical circles. In other words, for example, my youngest son, he used to do lots of triathlon. I knew he didn't have REDS because he was eating tons of pasta, you'll be pleased to hear. Anyway, but he was definitely fatigued. There was something going on, right? And so he had glandular fever, okay? So the blood tests, please, again, I feel bad saying this about my fellow medical professionals, but sometimes not all of them are as well informed, and also frankly might not understand dance as Steph and I do. So the blood tests are crucial to make sure there isn't anything else going on. Maybe the vitamin D is low, maybe there are other things that need to be addressed. And also, but if actually all those things are fine and the blood tests are such, the pattern, you can easily distinguish those. Steph and I would be able to see, oh yes, this is a picture consistent with being in low energy availability. So yeah, I'm afraid you have to kind of insist. If you have any problems wherever you are, if you're in the UK, you can always get in contact with me and I'll try and help, or Steph of course will help if you're in Europe to direct you to get those blood tests that are required.
Exactly. So we've got 2 questions here.
Oh yeah.
Number 1 is thank you for 2 wonderful presentations. Thank you.
Yeah.
Should dancers adjust their intake during holiday periods, perhaps still exercising but not a full schedule, or lockdown? Could be lockdown as well. If so, what areas would you look to adjust? Well, actually, it's just you're going to be less hungry, very likely. So your overall intake will be lower. But otherwise, there's nothing to cut out. Keep it balanced.
I think that's such an important point, because listen, as I say, I can speak with, because I've been all through this, by the way. So I know even now, even though I'm really old, even when I had my hip replacements a few years ago, it was easy for me to go back into my old mentality and think, because I couldn't go to class for 4 months. I could only do rehab stuff, really boring anyway. And honestly, I was like that. My mind was like, I don't deserve to eat carbohydrates. I don't deserve, because I'm not doing a class. So, but then actually I had and I'm a doctor and I'm really old. And anyway, but even me, I had to say, that's stupid. This is actually crucial time if you're recovering from injury, and certainly if you're on holiday, you're on holiday. Why are you on holiday? Because you need a recovery, and we've talked how important recovery is. So actually, you should not alter anything, okay? And you need the protein, you need the carbohydrates, you need to let your body, if you're recovering from injury, of course, rehab, get better. And so actually, so I know it's tempting if you're on holiday or injured, and there's a change in pattern. You think, oh, I don't need that now because I'm not doing this, but actually that's not the case. And remember my diagram, that actually a lot of the energy is required just for staying healthy, especially if you've got a backlog of it. It's been a very, busy, I don't want to call season, because you said there isn't a season, but you've had a very busy block of training and performance. So use the holiday. This is a time to recover. So just to super reinforce that point, please don't change and eat less. And also during lockdown, again, I know perhaps there's a temptation to even do more than you were before, because there were so many Zoom classes available. And again, I'm guilty of that myself. When it first started, it was like, oh, I was even doing 2 Zoom classes a day. And then it was my family that said, hold on a sec, what are you doing? You're doing crazy. You're doing more than you were before. And then, so it's an easy thing to do, isn't it? To slip into that. If it's possible to do more, you want to, which is great. But please just keep everything, be mindful that, nutrition is your body's non-negotiable, right? You need to look after it.
Absolutely. So we've got another one. What food will stop yourself from feeling dizzy during class? So feeling dizzy can have really, let's say, a couple of causes. Let's talk about the two that are typically linked to nutrition. So the one would be you're actually really in fat burning mode, but you're trying to go just as hard as you did in the class before, which strains your body quite a bit. You would be able to get back to a better state if you had some carbohydrates, which can be just a dried date, a couple of dried fruits, as I said, some jelly beans, or possibly a homemade sports drink, or just a sports drink that you bought in the store. And the other reason is, and that kind of goes together even, is that you're dehydrated. And lots of dancers are just like, I've got to drink more water, and I think there's little awareness that always drinking water is actually at some point, and especially now Europe being a bit hotter at the moment, is really not helpful at all, because while we are sweating, all of us, we are losing sodium as well. And if we are losing water, but we are losing sodium as well, and with only drinking water, we are absolutely not replacing this sodium. It means we are really getting into a state where our motor control system is impaired, where we just start to feel dizzy. This is why I said this is one of the typical nutritional problems we encounter. So homemade sports drinks, as I said, that's usually almost 1-to-1 juice and water plus like a quarter or a little bit more of a teaspoon of salt. And this salt will replace the sodium you've just lost through sweat. And it will make you feel a lot better already. So even though you continue to sweat, you have replaced one of the elements that contributes to making you feel dizzy. And the other thing is anything that is like juice or even tea already, they have what is called a better hydration index. So that means they stay in the body for longer, though you continue to sweat. Milk has actually the very best hydration, average hydration index. So that was what I wanted to say. This is why, another reason why it makes such an awesome recovery drink. So that's what I would say is nutrition related. And probably Nikki, you want to say something?
Yeah, well, I would definitely reinforce. I mean, you've covered it already, but just to emphasize, especially this time of year. I mean, apart from today, last week in London, it was so hot. And so I remember in the bad old days when I had to go and do my exams at the RAD, Royal Academy of Dancing in London. I remember we weren't even allowed to take in water. I mean, look very good. Look there, right? Okay, exactly. So, but I think that's so hydration. I think especially this time of year. But just to reinforce Steph's point, not just plain water. I think putting some orange juice or something in there, because then you've covered everything, haven't you? You've got a little bit of energy intake. It's easy to digest. Or otherwise, I also have I get electro tabs, which have got the sodium in, a little bit of, I think, magnesium maybe, and things like this. So having that, but I think actually having a diluted orange juice, that's perfect. It covers all bases, covers the hydration, covers a little bit of quick release energy for you. So I think that would really be the crucial thing. So I agree with you, basically.
Just to add, interestingly, because I mean, I hear that sort of like, oh gosh, I can't drink juice and not brush my teeth also, you know. The Australian Dental Association had a statement, I think it's 2, maybe 3 weeks ago right now. They would rather have you drink orange juice or diluted orange juice than have not enough saliva due to dehydration.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, and you need saliva also for the way your immune system. So we're getting into a whole other area. So basically, please, diluted fruit juice, something like that. That's the way to go for all those things. And that's a very good point about the teeth. So don't worry about your teeth. It's good.
We have a next one. I agree with everything you both said. Thank you. I suffered from what I know now were a Rett-related injury over my whole 20-year professional career. I wish I knew you both when I was a young dancer. Yeah, I think we can all join that club.
Yeah, so it goes back to the young one. So that's the thing about the young dancer.
I would have liked to know.
By the way, listen, if you are an adult, don't think that you've missed the boat. But nevertheless, having said that, and that is really what Steph and I, and also Beatrice with the Healthy Young Dance Project, trying to get the information to the youngsters, educate them so that they're aware, trying to break these old traditional things or misinformation, so they get into good habits, so that they don't have to change a bad habit. It's always better, isn't it? It's like technique in dancing. It's always better to start off with knowing the correct technique or knowing the correct information to start with than trying to backtrack and go over things.
Exactly. I would also like to ask if you would both like to speak about dancers needing to identify, I think it's food intolerances as well, if they feel off, for example, dairy and gluten. This was my lived experience, and my solutions was to go to an anti-inflammatory naturopathic diet. Yeah, we could make that, I don't know, probably another hour. Definitely. So it's really tricky because lots of it is being promoted on the socials, and it's, so if you think, let's just cut it down to that. If you think you always experience problems if you have eaten something that contains dairy, you can try and reduce the intake or actually cut it out for a week or two and see how that goes, and then carefully reintroduce it. But I'm really careful recommending this because this can be just a trigger to fully cut out some food groups. So with dairy, it's actually quite easy. Go and see if you're intolerant. Get yourself tested.
Yeah, get the lactose test. But I think that's an important point, Steph, because there are some people there who are truly intolerant, and that was one of the things we put on our questionnaire. But the thing is, there's a difference between thinking you are and actually being, because it might be, like I mentioned in my talk, it might be actually that you're not fueling sufficiently or good consistently throughout the day. I think you mentioned that, Steph, about, you know, even if you eat sufficient, if you do your balance sheet at the end of the day and you've eaten enough, if you've had long times when you haven't been eating, then actually that can affect your digestion quite badly. So it's easy sometimes to misinterpret gastric symptoms as being, oh, I must be intolerant to X, Y, or Z, when actually it's maybe the timing of the food or the amount of the food. But nevertheless, as we said, you know, go and get the test. If you want to know for sure, get the test, or just whilst you're waiting to get that test done, just have a look at your sort of eating schedule and just double check that you're following the recommendations Steph gave about, you know, the meals always having carbohydrate and protein and the snacks and all this sort of thing. So you can be doing that anyway as homework to see if that helps.
Yeah, exactly, and quite similar somehow for gluten, because I mean this is
yes, exactly.
So there's a very low percentage in the general population with celiac disease. So that means they actually really can't metabolize gluten at all. There is a discussion about some people being gluten sensitive. I wouldn't do that, let's say, without guidance, because that could easily again turn to, oh, I'm just going to cut it out. And I just would like everyone, or I just would like to remind everyone that gluten actually is a protein. So why would you want to cut it out?
Yeah, and also, I mean, I had a similar thing with my eldest son. And he didn't have the medical condition celiac disease where you can't, but maybe there was something in it. And so now he was the one that noticed that some of the gluten-free products actually have lower calorie carbohydrate content than the ones with gluten, you know. So you have to be aware that if you are going for the gluten-free ones, be aware, like you said, it's the protein anyway. And also they actually, I think he noticed that some products have lower energy availability. So just be aware of that. And, you know, it's sort of, if you haven't got the full-blown diagnosis of celiac, for example, he does tend to choose, if there's a choice, he will have the gluten-free, making sure it's got the right energy. But on the other hand, if he's going out to eat or something like that, he will have it. So I think that's the important thing. You know, why are you excluding it is really the underlying question with all of these things. Why are you excluding it? Is it just actually a way round of avoiding eating carbohydrates, or what? Be honest with yourself, I think is a thing.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Would you please like to discuss, for example, if an 18-year-old even an 18-year-old female dancer presents with still not having a period, can the damage to the body that was suffered during puberty be recovered from? I think I just...
Well, hopefully. It depends how quickly. If 18, so if you haven't started your periods by 16, then that's a medical condition called primary amenorrhea. And definitely from my study, I mentioned there is evidence that it isn't going to be so good for your bone health. You can definitely improve your bone health if you can help this dancer regain or restart their periods. Yes, the bones will definitely improve. Will they be able to improve to what they would be? We can never answer that question, because unless they've got an identical twin, right, whose periods didn't stop, then we will never know genetically what that person was their bone density was going to be. So I think the answer to the question is you can reverse some of the damage, if we want to call it that, from if your periods stop, but whether you can fully recover everything, we cannot. It's difficult to say. But I think the positive information is that you can. So I don't want people to think, oh, well, there's no point bothering because I can't, even if I do improve it, even if my periods do come back, it won't improve anything. That's not the case. Definitely, you will get some improvement, but how much, we don't know, because we don't know for the individual.
Yeah. One more question. What's an ideal breakfast ready for a day of classes and rehearsals? Thank you.
That's you.
That's me again. So very much preferred among dancers is actually porridge. I think I actually hear this like 90% of the times in my clients. That's what they prefer. So porridge is basically really just great. It comes with a decent amount of carbohydrates. It comes with a surprising amount of protein as well. Mm-hmm. You can always up it a little, so you can top it with lots of things. So what's preferred, berries is preferred, or some kind of yogurt additionally, or yogurt and berries and some granola. Or if you really need to take in a lot of energy, but you can't really up your volume anymore, I always recommend to add some seeds like pumpkin seeds and soybeans. Some roasted soybeans is also nice. Sunflower seeds, for example, because then you have only little volume more, but you have a lot of energy more. So that really is very good.
Energy density. Yeah, and also, by the way, for the porridge, I agree with you, by the way, entirely. And my son, who's an athlete, if you don't feel like something hot, he does overnight oats. And so that's another thing if it's hot weather, but porridge, just to reinforce that point, is such a good basis. And you can chuck other things according, blueberries he puts on the nuts, so the energy density, you can really get the energy density in there at the beginning of the day. So important. Please, I think you mentioned it, no fasted training. It plays havoc with your hormones, all right? So if anyone is going to ask that, or let's preempt that by saying, you know, it's not appropriate, okay?
Yeah. How long does it take to develop stress fractures when having amenorrhea? Or how long does it take for amenorrhea or low estrogen levels to significantly affect bone health?
Yeah, well, by the way, even if you don't do your refueling within that 30-minute window that you mentioned, Steph, there's evidence to show that affects your bone markers. So, I mean, I'm not saying that's going to be a stress fracture, by the way, but what I'm trying to say is that you probably think bones are quite boring, they don't change much, but actually there's evidence to show, it was actually an Australian study, if you don't refuel within that 30 minutes with the protein and the carbs like you described, Steph, then actually already that can have an effect on your bone health, the bone markers at least. But of course, if you do that repeatedly, if you keep being in low energy availability and your periods switch off, then of course the bones will just basically start to decrease. And in a study I did in male cyclists, I mean, obviously they're males, but nevertheless, you get the idea that over 6 months, if they weren't fueling correctly, they lost the same amount of bone density you would do as an astronaut at the International Space Station. So bones are way more sensitive than you think, okay? So, but of course, I'm afraid I can't give an exact number, like say, oh, well, after 2 months you will get a stress fracture. I can't say that because we don't know what your starting point was. But suffice to say, in answer to that question, it's a little bit scary in some ways. It's quicker than you think, okay? And some are more susceptible to stress fractures than others. So yeah, please, if you're amenorrheic, please don't, this is not normal. This will end up with problems, so please seek help.
What are your recommendations for a dancer that suffers of cramps specifically, or especially in high rehearsal times, and that can be worrying for the performance on stage, as can be worrying to get those cramps while performing? Yeah, for sure. So first of all, I mean, I think we've all heard this myth. I'm sorry to say, it's a myth. It's all down to magnesium and some magnesium deficiency. Actually, the etiology of muscle cramps is still unknown. Science doesn't really know it. What is more frequent is cramps when it's hot, so in hot temperatures. which very often goes together with what I said about hydration, being in a slightly dehydrated status, having had water only, no replacement of electrolytes, particularly sodium, no beverage that stays in the body a little longer or has a slightly higher beverage hydration index than water, and maybe also being underfueled.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Various etiologies, reasons for cramps. There's just the muscle fatigue itself. I mean, if you think about Bluebird, if you're doing however many volleys, I don't know, whatever, just repeatedly using the same muscle over and over again, that in itself, the muscle could be fatigued and go into cramp. Also, there are, like you say, the magnesium story. I think it's got something in it, by the way, because in this hot weather we had here last week, I was getting some calf cramps, and I did actually put on some magnesium gel, but I don't know if it did any good. But anyway, but also you're right, if you're just generally fatigued, you're likely to get cramps. So I think covering all those bases, I mean, you can't change the choreography of Bluebird, I know, but be aware that if you need to have the the fatigability of the muscle, you need to train that, and then take care, like you say, of the hydration and the various salts and your energy. So I think that's about it for that.
I think there was one more. I just wanted to say, so yeah, definitely make sure you have your glycogen restored as much as possible, and you have also really at hand as much carbohydrates as possible. So when we talk about performance, you can have a bottle of water, have a sports drink as well. Really try and choose whatever you like most, be that a store-bought one or a homemade one, but definitely have them at hand. Then you can go back onto stage confidentially, being like, okay, I've done what I could.
Yeah, so it's covering all the possibilities, isn't it? Having it all there to hand and finding out, and also please find out what works for you before your performance, of course. So make sure that it's something that, like you said, you like and you tolerate, and doesn't make you feel sick or something like that. So just covering all the bases, isn't it, really?
Absolutely. And I think that actually goes with the very last one I see here. What about juicing fresh fruit and veg to get more quick energy? That will not make dancers feel too full on quick breaks. That's exactly the homemade sports drinks we were talking about. So I wouldn't necessarily say juice veg is good.
No.
I mean, I like it. I actually really like a green juice, but it comes with almost no energy. So there's just so little energy in it. That's nice to drink, but probably in the majority of the cases, it's just better to really eat it as a whole food and have the benefit of the fibers. Juicing and diluting some fruits, totally fine. Just matches what we said before. That is a very, let's say, common form of energy in sports. A smoothie would be better, but it depends. A smoothie certainly is not better when you have these very short breaks, these ultra short breaks while you're running, because smoothie, of course, comes still, let's say you've just blended the whole fruit, you've got still everything that is contained in this whole fruit, and that will be a bit heavier, that will be slower absorbed, and that will make you feel probably a little bit more uncomfortable if you really have to run and move.
Smoothie is more for the recovery, I think. Just to reiterate that point that Steph made about milk. Milk is a brilliant, it's so fantastic. I mean, Louise Burke, the amazing nutritionist, if anyone wants to look about anything about nutrition, please look at her. But the milk is amazing, but the smoothie, I think, is more for the recovery. Here at home, we have a NutriBullet, and we mix up banana and milk, and that gives you the casein and a bit of carbohydrate if you put in the banana. But I don't think that would be the sort of thing you would want to be drinking, as you say, if you've got a short break, because it would be too heavy on the stomach. But certainly the smoothie, whoever asked that question, great, but I think more for the recovery phase.
Yeah, and then I've got here a smoothie for breakfast. You can have a smoothie for breakfast, but I always recommend to blend in some oats then, so to really thorough source of complex carbohydrates, some protein. So, and just Beatrice has asked me to say something, that the Healthy Young Dancer project, that she doesn't use Schulze. She said, I use my professional name of Beatrice Bernstein. If you search for Schulze, they will not find me. But yeah, so I said it. Just clarify that.
Yeah, no, sure, cool. Great. Guys, listen, so thanks for Steph for our joint thing, fun, and thanks for the
invite.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks for the team over there. Anything so guys want to say? Yeah.
Thank you so much to both of you. That was for us a pleasure. It's very interesting, everything you said. I think it will help many dancers to improve their nutrition, and they will help them to pay attention to some aspects that they didn't know before, and that they are actually very important, and we were actually not aware of them. So I think your presentations were excellent and will be very helpful for many of us. So we thank you so much for your time and for your generosity. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for the invitation, and I think all our contacts that Steph mentioned, the various websites, you know, the emails, if people want to ask something more personal, yes. We would also be happy to have that, wouldn't we, Steph? I think.
Absolutely.
Yes, cool. Of course. And yeah, we already post your accounts in our with the flyer in our Instagram account. So if someone needs that information, they know it's there. Yeah. And we will keep posting some story about our seminar today. So people hopefully can also, some people that could not attend it today at this time, they can go to YouTube and watch it there to get this important information. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you guys.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.
See you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. See you. Bye.
Bye.